Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancey Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 87, Unbreakable Movie Review. I'm Chris McBrien, along with Derek Myers, Caveman himself, as always. Yancey Eaton actually is going to join us next week, Caveman. But in the meantime, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How you doing this week, Chris?
I'm doing great. It was actually just before I came downstairs to jump in the studio here and record with you. My wife and I were actually watching Three's Company.
Nice. Who was the female lead beside Joyce DeWitt? Because I know that changed a few times over the course of the show.
It was one of the later ones, and my wife and I were just talking about this because I never really liked the older ones with like Suzanne Summers and the Ropers. I'm more of a fan of the later ones with Terry, Priscilla Barnes, and with Mr. Furley, and that's what it was.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was funny enough. So the guest, I guess, on this week's episode, was this girl that was interested in Jack, and she wanted to change him and turn him into a different man. And I'm watching it, and I go, oh man, I know that girl. That's she was the wife on Summer Rental with John Candy. And my wife,
oh, jeez.
You're sure? I'm like, yeah, I think her name's Kelly Austin. And we go and look it up on IMDb. She's like, how do you know this stuff? I'm like, I don't know. I love this old stuff. What can I say? I'm like ingrained in this stuff. Before we carry on, I do want to mention you can find us on Twitter at CMcBrien. You'll find Derek at Amaron_DM. You can go to popcultureworld.com. All of our contact information is there. And if you listen to the show on iTunes, please just take a minute and review the show for us. That would be really, really wonderful. So Three's Company is what's new in my world. Anything new for you? And then I also would remind me before we get started, I want to give you a bit of a shout out, a little kudos for you. But
okay.
What's new in your world?
You know what? Not a whole lot new in the way of pop culture. I mentioned last week I've been binge watching the show Billions.
Oh, yes.
And so there are 3 seasons in Billions. I'm about halfway through season 3. So by the next time we record, I should be done. I'm loving it. The show, in my opinion, is getting better and better with every episode. I'm both excited to see where the show goes and disappointed that I only have like 5 more episodes, because then I'm going to have to wait another year.
And, I mentioned to you, I think it was even last week on the show, I just finished up Ozark, the season 2, so we're done with that, and I'm looking for something new for my wife and I to watch, sort of a binge watch kind of thing. So if anybody wants to tweet me at CMcBrien, McBrien is IEN, send me a tweet and tell me what show my wife and I should start binge watching, because we're looking for something. I'm not sure what it is yet. We've kind of thrown a couple ideas around. I obviously want to go back and watch Happy Days or The Love Boat. She's telling me, no, we can't do that. We have to watch something new. And I'm like, okay. So any ideas, you can send it out. I wanted to give you a little bit of a shout out, though.
Okay.
A couple shows ago, we did our top 5 Queen songs, because both you and I love Queen, and we always have. Like, yes, they're so good. So we did, our top 5 Queen songs, because, in line with the movie Bohemian Rhapsody and all that stuff. And, sometimes I know this is going to come as a bit of a shock to you, Cave, and anyone that listens to the show, that I get a little bit stuck on things in the past, and I just kind of like get into a groove with old stuff, and I just don't really change my mind on too many things. I don't expand my horizons very much, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so sometimes I have trouble going back and looking at old stuff through a different lens, and I get stuck on things that I like, and then that's it. And when we did our top 5 list, I got to just say, you know what? You are absolutely right. I kind of like missed the boat on this one. But when it comes to the top 5 Queen songs, Don't Stop Me Now is probably their best song. And you mentioned that, and I didn't, and I really, because I think when I was younger, I didn't really love the song that much. And then I went back, and because you mentioned that as one of your top Queen songs, I was like, really? And so I went back and listened to it, and I listened to it once, and I was like, oh my God, really? That is phenomenal. And then it came back to me too in the movie. They played that during the closing credits.
They did indeed. Yes, and that was one of the things I said. Oh. When I hear that song, it always makes me happy. If I have a bad day, it makes it, it's just a little glimmer of sunshine in what might be a bad day. The music is so positive, and it's so memorable. It's an earworm. As soon as for me anyway, when I hear it, it makes me feel good. And then I find I'm sort of humming it and singing it to myself the rest of the day. And when we watched Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie, and we came out. They played that over the closing credits. When we left the movie, I'm humming that in the car the whole way home. And my wife's like, okay, change the track. Because I was saying it. I must have hummed the whole thing like 3 or 4 times on the way home. She's like, okay, that's enough of that. You got to listen to something else. It's a great song, but you're not Freddie Mercury. Stop singing. So.
And not to rehash Queen again, because we've got our own topic this week. But, the thing is, they had this ability, this uncanny ability to do over the top, like just completely over the top stuff, over the top music, lyrics, everything, and get away with it. A lot of bands try and go over the top and they come off as just being campy. But Queen did over the top and they just did it so good. Like there's just something about them. There's that intangible quality that real art has that you just can't put your finger on. You look at a wonderful painting and you're like, I don't know the intricacies of painting and the styles, but I know that's really wonderful. And there's something about their music that strikes that chord to me. I think if anyone else tried it, it just wouldn't be the same. And this was really driven home for me because if you haven't seen this on YouTube, go look it up. Do you ever watch The Late Late Show with James Corden? I don't watch this show because, of course, I just watch old stuff, right? But I found this thing on YouTube where he is doing his show and he's talking about how Adam Lambert, from American Idol has joined Queen and is on tour with them and he's singing with them. And James Corden is like picking on him, saying, I could be better than him. So, of course, Adam Lambert walks into the studio and he's like, oh, what's going on? And he's like, you think you're better than me? And this James Corden's like, yeah, and I know I'm better than you. I'd be a way better frontman of Queen than you. And he's like, yeah, well, why don't we have a showdown right now on your stage? And he's like, we can't. Queen's not here. And they pull back the curtain and there's Queen. So, and they go toe to toe singing the songs. And it's so good. And they're both really, really talented singers. But the thing that struck home, and the reason why I bring it up is because I watched it with my wife and she's like, oh my God, that Adam, she goes like, James Corden can sing, but Adam Lambert is just so good. And I'm like, yeah, he is. But I think you need to see something. And I put it over to the video of Queen doing Don't Stop Me Now. And I said, listen to this. And when you put it back to back like that, when you listen to Adam Lambert sing, you're like, oh my God, the guy's got great pipes. He's unbelievable range, pitch perfect. But then when you play him back to back with Freddie Mercury singing, like there's just no comparison. It's just, it's unbelievable.
It's a great kind of comparison.
Oh, it's just crazy when you put them back to back. But kudos to you. Don't Stop Me Now. It's such a good song. It's so good. You were right. I was wrong. So anyway, on that note, let's get started. I wanted to go back and watch The Love Boat.
I'm going to give you a lot of reasons to think I'm nerdy tonight.
I've never actually watched Alf.
Jerry Seinfeld's mother.
We were actually just talking about Alf in my house last week.
And I knew you'd be on my side about all this.
Chris, he normally has the textbook answer.
The Love Boat.
He obviously has not read the science fiction textbook.
Very cool.
But is it, Chris? But is it cool?
I'll settle down, young man.
I do love this movie.
And yes, Yancey, it is cool, by the way. Okay, so this week we're taking a look at the 2000 film Unbreakable. Now, you suggested this movie to me, Caveman. I'd never seen it. So why don't you start us off a little bit? Like, I want to know, why did you pick this movie? What did you like about it? Like, why did you think it was worth reviewing for the pod? So I'll let you kind of take things away first, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. One thing I like, it's listening to myself talk, as the listeners are probably well aware of by now. Okay, so let me give you a little – let's assume for a minute you have never seen this movie. You don't know what this movie's about. I think it might actually sort of fall in that dead zone between the millennial and Gen X where some of the listeners are, a little bit older or a little bit younger. They may not remember this movie one way or the other. So Unbreakable came out in 2000. It was written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, who people hopefully remember from his phenomenal film The Sixth Sense. And if you've seen Unbreakable, hopefully you remember him from this film as well. This is basically a superhero movie before superhero movies were a thing. So this is before Jon Favreau did Iron Man. This is before the Avengers. This is before Captain America. This is before The Dark Knight. This is still at a point where the sort of the high point of comic book movies was 1989's Tim Burton Batman, which was great in its own right, but does not necessarily play on the same level as the movies of today when we talk about superhero movies. So this came out in a time period where there were no superhero movies on the landscape, and there was no expectation of what it can or should be. Now, it does not tell the story of a pre-existing comic book character. It is not an IP that's been brought from a print medium to the film medium. M. Night Shyamalan created this story out of his own imagination, although I'm sure he was influenced by a number of other things. And this was an original story featuring original characters that took place in a real world setting. And the story, sort of with the broad strokes, is it begins with a character. A child is born, and his bones, as a baby, he's born with broken bones. And you find out through a series of quick flashbacks that as this child grew up, he has this genetic condition where his bones are exceptionally brittle. So anytime he has what would normally just be a trip and fall, he would break his arm or break his leg. And the children in his school tease him by calling him Mr. Glass because he's as fragile as glass. And so we start the movie by meeting this character. And then we flash forward 20 years, 30 years, and we cut to Bruce Willis's character who is on a train, and the train crashes. And we find out that he is the sole survivor of this train crash. But not only that, he doesn't have a scratch, he doesn't have a bruise, there's no injuries. He is unharmed. And everyone's like, oh my God, it's a miracle. This man literally walked away from a train wreck that killed hundreds of other people. And you get the interaction, friendship, and juxtaposition of these two characters. The other one played by Samuel L. Jackson, whose character's name is Elijah Price, quote unquote Mr. Glass, who has these bones that break very easily. And he goes to Bruce Willis's character and basically says, hey, I heard you survived this train crash. I have this condition where my bones are quite brittle. I've always wondered if there could be someone who is the opposite of me, whose bones are exceptionally hard, who, where I fall down and I take serious damage, somebody could live through a train crash and walk away unscathed. And so the movie then follows these two characters, mostly the Bruce Willis character, as he's starting to question whether or not he is literally unbreakable or whether he is just fortunate given the circumstances. He's very skeptical. He's he doesn't see himself as a Superman type character who runs into the burning building to save the children kind of thing. For quite a bit of the movie, he thinks that the Samuel L. Jackson character is crazy. This guy is cuckoo bananas. I don't want to have anything to do with him. He's potentially a lunatic. My family could be in jeopardy by even being associated with this guy. But through the course of the movie, Bruce Willis starts to slowly accept that, you know what, maybe I am special. Maybe I have a calling. You learn through the course of the movie that he has these like premonitions or flashes of people doing bad things, and through the course of his life he's just sort of attributed this to instinct, but he has put himself in a position where he can be helpful to people. He works as a security guard in a university at the football stadium, and then through the course of the movie you get the development of these characters. It does sort of have, I don't want to say a twist ending, but the ending is maybe not as telegraphed as you might think. So I don't necessarily want to ruin it, but I don't think we can talk about this in great detail without. So if you haven't seen this movie and so far you think, oh, that might be interesting, pause the podcast, go watch the movie, and then come back and finish listening to the episode.
Oh, yeah. We always give spoiler alerts.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave it at that. Chris, I'm curious as to whether you like this or not. I know that superhero movies aren't necessarily your thing, but I don't necessarily think you're predisposed to dislike them. I think you probably are a fan of Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson's work, at least some of it.
Yep.
So, and I know you like The Sixth Sense a lot.
Oh, I like that movie a lot. Yeah.
I know that M. Night Shyamalan has certainly had some misses along the way as well. And I'm curious as to whether or not you sort of feel this falls in the, hit the mark, miss the mark, close to the mark. I'm really curious to hear where you landed on this. So take it away. Let me know what you think.
A couple of things that I'll mention on that. So first of all, you mentioned something there. You said this is a superhero movie before superhero movies sort of became a thing. But I would just challenge that a little bit and say, no, to me, the superhero movie that was a superhero movie before they became a thing was 1978 Superman with Christopher Reeve. God, I love that movie.
Okay, I'll give you that one. I will definitely acknowledge that. And yes, it was great. God, Superman 1, Superman 2, fantastic films.
So good.
But with Superman, you have a recognized character before anyone buys a movie ticket. You show them the S emblem. People have a familiarity with that. So this is a movie that was literally just sold on the name the pre-existing track record from The Sixth Sense of the writer-director and of the two lead cast members of Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Willis, who had done a couple of movies. They were in Die Hard 3. They were both appeared in Pulp Fiction. So again, you've got two pretty big movie stars lending their name, and obviously Bruce Willis was in Sixth Sense, also M. Night Shyamalan film as well. So that was sort of the selling point of this movie, because again, when it came out, the internet was relatively in its infancy, and so it needed to have a hook without giving too much away. And so the movie I think did well, but was not a huge runaway hit. But I think over time it has found its footing and has a very loyal following.
I would say that, sometimes I have these days where I just can't shut my brain off. You know what I mean? It's the end of a long day and it's at night. I'm trying to fall asleep. And sometimes I have to try a couple of different things. Like sometimes I read. That helps me. Sometimes I drink warm milk. But now I can actually add watching Unbreakable to the list of things that will put me to sleep, because for me, this movie was boring, man. It was boring. I've mentioned this on the show before. I usually watch these movies with my wife, and this was the case here. And it was funny, whenever Yancey used to nominate films for the podcast, my wife would watch the movie with me, and then she would be like, "Oh man, this movie sucks. It's a dystopian future crap." And this time she was watching it, she's like, "Oh my God, this movie sucks. It's nerd crap." And so apparently, Caveman, you nominate nerd crap for me to watch. Just wanted to share that with you. I hope we don't get into a groove with this nerd crap stuff, but the way that Yancey did with his dystopian films. So yeah, I mean, a couple of things like you mentioned, that I like The Sixth Sense. I love The Sixth Sense. I thought it was great. I thought it was just masterful. And then also, as I mentioned before, the only other M. Night Shyamalan movie I'd ever seen was The Village. I went to see it in the theater for some reason, and I absolutely hated it. And so I was curious as to where this would fall on the spectrum, more towards Sixth Sense or more toward The Village. Unfortunately, it's a bit more towards The Village, but it's not as bad as The Village. Oh my God, that movie, The Village. Have you seen that, the movie The Village?
Yeah, man, I saw it in the theater as well.
I hated it. It was awful. That story, that stupid quote unquote twist ending. And Adrian Brody, you know what the problem with Adrian Brody in that movie was? He went full and you never go full. And before I get hate mail on this, it's a line.
You can't say that word anymore, Chris.
I know. It's a line from Tropic Thunder, right? Obviously. But Adrian Brody was awful in The Village, and he never should have went full. But this movie, I have some questions for you. You just mentioned the opening scene on the train. And I'm curious to know, because M. Night Shyamalan, to me, seems like, he had such a big hit with The Sixth Sense, his first, big feature film, right? And then because it had that big twist ending, it just feels like he's got to go back there again. He's got to go. But the other thing to me is that Shyamalan, and I don't know if this is, maybe this is just me. It seems like he almost feels like he has a Hitchcockian thing going on with him, and not just because, he does a cameo in the film. He likes to keep the audience guessing and all this. So I think in some ways he thinks he's like Hitchcock, right? So therefore he uses a lot of style in his film. And I want to know, what's the significance of that opening scene on the train? Remember, there's that attractive woman comes up and sits down beside, and then he takes his ring off, and then he's awkwardly talking to her. And I mean, I get the fact, it kind of sets up the fact that he's estranged from his wife. But what the hell does it have to do with the plot of the film? To me, it just seems so disconnected from everything. And for a guy that is kind of this Hitchcockian guy, every frame means something. It's a piece of the puzzle of putting this together. And I understand that the train has to crash, right, in order to set up the fact that he's invincible. I get that. But I don't understand what the interaction with the woman had to do with anything. It seemed very odd to me. And I don't know if it was just an attempt at some misdirection, done on purpose by the director, because he does seem to use some misdirection in this film. So I don't know. I have no idea. Any ideas on that?
Well, a little bit. I think that one of the things that I believe that he was trying to do with this story was really nail the fact that Bruce Willis's character, David Dunn, is he's got a wife and a son, but there's significant problems going on with this relationship. The husband and wife are living in separate bedrooms in the house. There's clearly some sort of issue or problem. At a later point, the wife sort of approaches him to try and say, like, you know, I think we should start again. Like it sort of implies, or well, I don't think it implies it. It clearly implies that whatever the problem was seems to have been her fault, or at least the perception is it was her fault. Almost like he was the wronged party, and he's been hurt. It seems like they were getting ready to split up or get divorced, because at a point in the movie he talks about the story takes place in Philadelphia. He's on the train ride home from New York to Philadelphia. He talks about having gone to New York to apply for this job, and you know, it's sort of leans back to what we talked about last week in the Stan Lee episode, where I think M. Night Shyamalan is trying to demonstrate that this character is a very realistic character with real life problems. The fact that he may or may not be a superhero or may not have these superpowers doesn't make his life any better. If anything, it could make his life more complicated, which I think the Marvel comics, again, we talked about the last week, is one of the reasons that they've been successful. Is you have these real people with real problems, and sometimes the powers get in the way. Like you think of Spider-Man, you know, how many times does he have to disappoint his friends and family and make up some lame excuse as to why he missed something important because he had to put on the Spider-Man costume and go stop a crime? You know, the idea that the greater good is what's needed. So I think the scene on the train is just there to emphasize that here's this guy. He's a little bit older. He's clearly going through some marital problems, but he's awkward, right? Like as he tries to interact with this woman, she picks up right away that he's sort of very awkwardly trying to hit on her. Whether or not she saw that he had the wedding ring and then now he doesn't, it's like it sort of sends a red flag to her, and she's like, I'm gonna go sit in a different seat. And I think it's just that part of the setup. Like, okay, where's the story gonna go? Here's this regular guy who's on a train crash. And he walks away, and it's like, okay, let's see where this goes next.
I guess I noticed the camera style in that opening scene too. It's very interesting, like how it's shot. It's basically shot from in between the seats in front of Bruce Willis and the woman, almost voyeuristically. Like it's like you're peering in on their conversation. Like to me, it's very stylistic, but I just didn't feel like there was a lot of substance to it. Like it was like there was no reason for it. It doesn't drive the story. It doesn't have any thematic importance other than just looking interesting. And then same thing, another example that I made a note of was later on in the movie when Samuel L. Jackson's character was a kid. Remember, he gets his first comic book. He has to go across the road and open up the gift. And the camera's directly overhead. It kind of spins around as he flips the comic book around. And it just feels like just this stylistic camera work just for the hell of it. Like it just, I don't know. There's something about the movie that at times the director just feels like he's trying to come off as artsy or something, but it just didn't work for me. I don't know.
So let me speak to that then.
Please do. Yeah, because I'm curious to know. So
from what, and I've done a little bit of reading on this, and some of it I sort of picked up on myself, and some of this is just fan theory. But the feeling was that the director deliberately shot in a style that would be reminiscent of comic book panels. So you have unusual angles of shots, like those shots between the seats at the beginning. You have scenes from, you know, the overhead of the comic book with the spinning, and a lot of the shots, the camera is not set up parallel with the ground. It's like slightly askew. It's characters in the foreground, background a little bit, to do that sort of forced perspective of some characters appearing larger and such. And the belief is that was a deliberate choice by the director to subtly, or in some cases not so subtly, remind you that this is very much like a comic book story.
Okay.
Even before you get to a point where you start to believe that, hey, is David Dunn a superhero? Does he have powers in the quote unquote, you know, superhero way? Or again, with M. Night Shyamalan at the time, you were like, okay, well, there's going to be some sort of twist. Maybe the twist is he's not really superpowered. So I think there was a certain amount of give and take from the audience at the time of, you're taking this journey for the first time with these characters. And I'll admit, it is slow. I actually found when I was watching it this week, I'm like, I don't remember being this slow. So I'll give you that. But I think a lot of the sort of fancy, unusual camera work is a deliberate choice by the director to try and mimic a comic book panel.
Okay, that's fine. I do got to say one thing. When it started out, you know, on that train, when the train crashed, and then he's the only one that survives the crash without like a single scratch, as you mentioned, my first thought when that happened was, I'm like, okay, he's dead. He really died, and he doesn't know he's dead. Boy, this M. Night Shyamalan sure is a one-trick pony. No, luckily that wasn't the case. Obviously, the movie went on.
Right.
But it kind of brings me also to the final scene when, and again, spoiler alerts, obviously, when he's like, it's time we shook hands. And then they shake hands, and that's when he realizes, oh my God, Samuel L. Jackson's character is really evil, and he's the one that did all this stuff, and he's a bad guy, and all this. And then I again, it came back to me, and I realized, like, M. Night Shyamalan set himself up, in a good way and in a bad way for his career with The Sixth Sense, because he set himself up as being like a director you got to reckon with, because man, oh man, this guy, is the first guy really since Hitchcock that's been able to just get you,
Yeah.
But the problem is, so that's a wonderful thing. He set up his career wonderfully that way. But then it was also a detriment because now he feels like he's got to live up to it. And that was the thing I hated about The Village. It's like, oh, they have this twist ending. Like, is that what this is all about? So you're this guy that just does a twist ending every movie. And that's what that scene felt like. And to me, it was driven home by the way that it's shot. Because if you look at Bruce Willis's reaction, it looked, felt, style, everything the same as the end of The Sixth Sense. His reaction, like, oh my God, this is all, it's been in front of me the whole time and I didn't see it. This was the bad guy. So it just felt a little stilted. Like I feel bad for M. Night Shyamalan because he's been, put on this pedestal with that first movie. And it's just like, it's like a band that comes along and has like an amazing hit. It's like, it kind of hangs around them like an albatross, and that's what I feel like The Sixth Sense did to this guy. And in a lot of ways, his career's never recovered. And it's got to be tough as an artist to come out like that and to just like hit a home run, hit your masterpiece on your very first try, because there's nowhere else to go but down. The Sixth Sense is an absolutely brilliant film. And it's funny because when I watched it for the first time, I remember thinking, boy, this movie is slow and boring. And then the end of the movie comes and it just like, as soon as the reveal happens, I'm like, that son of a bitch, that director, he got me. Everything was there. The red doorknob, the girl his wife not responding to, it was all right in front of me the whole time. You son of a bitch. And it was just a wonderful experience to have in a theater. And, unfortunately he's been saddled with that ever since. Yeah. That's got to be tough. I don't envy the guy because the expectations are always there. And it'll be impossible to ever recreate that. He's tried a couple of times. He's got to go in a complete different direction. You know what he has to do? He should come up with like a comedy or something like completely different that nobody would ever expect. And just try to just be like, an artist. I don't know. That's what he needs to do. He needs to just go a completely different way. I know that sounds crazy.
So before he directed The Sixth Sense, he wrote the movie Stuart Little, which is a children's movie about the little mouse voiced by Michael J. Fox that moves in with the human family.
Wasn't that like based on a book or something like that? So
I think it was.
Okay.
But he got the
adapted screenplay, I guess.
Yeah. So to your point, very different than any of the work that came after it, and almost sort of contrary to what you were just saying. It's like, it's almost too bad that he didn't have a chance to do that work after The Sixth Sense work, to sort of like be the cracker in your mouth to cleanse your palate and go, okay, let's see what he's got next, instead of, I want more of what I got. Ooh, it wasn't as good. Ooh, that wasn't as good as that one. Ooh, that wasn't even as good as the one before that.
And it's like he's just trying to do the same thing over and over and recreate that magic. You're right. Like, it'd be neat to see him maybe do a kid's film or something like that. It's just something completely different. Like a complete different genre would be interesting to see. And then maybe come back, sort of refreshed, and rejuvenated back into this genre again of this. You mentioned about Willis's character, how he's kind of basically depressed. I appreciate your take on his character because I saw it a different way, and I like the way you explain it. The fact that he didn't really take to his new kind of quote unquote superhero role all that well because it's a burden, which is cool. Because when I was watching, I'm thinking, okay, so he's basically depressed through the whole movie, right? He's almost catatonic. For crying out loud, right? And at one point, I think, Samuel L. Jackson's character says to him, like every day when you wake up, are you unhappy? He's like, yep, every day I wake up, I'm unhappy. And then when he finds out he's a superhero, he wakes up that day and he says, yeah, no, today I woke up and I was happy. But you never really get that sense from him. So in that sort of sense, like, I feel like Willis's performance missed the mark a little bit for me. I guess I understand what you're saying is that maybe he's not quite happy because this is a burden, you know, that he has this superhero or he is this. But how much of a superhero is he? He went in and he snuck in and he choked out a guy that was like kidnapping people. Like, you know what I mean? So it wasn't a real superhero. I mean, he didn't even have any superpowers to get out of the pool. They had to pull him out, right? Right. And I understand Waters is kryptonite or whatever the hell that was all about. But still, he didn't do anything that was a superhero thing. He didn't have any strength or anything. He just wrestled with this guy and choked him. And then he freed his victims. That was it. So he was a good Samaritan. He was like a vigilante, you know?
Right. So think of it like more like baby steps. So if this was a comic book, you have 20 pages where you've got to tell the whole story. And in a comic book, there are certain expectations that a story works in a certain way, and that the characters, especially the heroes, are grandiose, over the top. Like, think of a comic book featuring Superman. You know, through the course of this comic book, Superman's going to fly, and he's going to, you know, bullets going to be shot at his chest. They're going to bounce out, and he's going to use his heat vision and his cold breath and his super speed. And he's going to do all the amazing things. And at the end of the book, everything's great. And it's all fine. I think, again, trying to ground this more in a realistic portrayal of how this might actually work, you get this again. He deliberately has this slow pace, and I think you're right. I think Bruce Willis's character is probably clinically depressed, and you find out through the course of the story that, you know, he met Robin Wright's character when they were young, when they were in college, and he was a football star because you learn that he's got exceptional strength and he can't be hurt. And you got to think those are great qualities if you're going to play professional football, which is probably why he was such a good athlete. He had these natural abilities that, although he maybe didn't understand what they were at the time, it gave him a natural edge. But he understood them enough that he realized, if I want to play football and be a star, I can be and I will be. But he's met this woman. He loves this woman. He wants to spend his life with her. In order to do that, he has to give up this passion for football. And through the course of the story, you sort of, all of these details are revealed. And I think that in the back of his mind has always been a sore spot, although they never actually come right out and say it. You know, maybe that's part of the reason he's depressed is he didn't get to live his dream. He got the girl, which is great, which obviously made him happy for a long time. But when we pick up this movie, he's now lost the girl. So he's given up his dream, and now he's lost the girl that he gave up his dream to have. And he doesn't know what to do with his life. He's working as a security guard. You know, his life didn't go where he thought it was going to go. And, you know, we get the event of the train crash. We have the introduction of Samuel Jackson's character sort of opening his eyes to the bigger possibilities. And to your point, where he talks about, you know, I wake up every day and I'm sad. And then by the end of the movie, once he's sort of accepted, I have these abilities, I can do good things that other people maybe can't do. I'm going to embrace this. Yes, I woke up today and I actually felt good. And now that he's got this, again, baby steps. It's not just a light switch goes off or comes on and I go from being depressed to not being depressed. It doesn't work that way. It's a long, slow process. And I got the sense that by the end of the movie, we've seen him turn a corner. He's taken a first step. So to your point, when he goes into the house and he rescues the people that were in there, you know, the parents have already been killed. He ends up fighting with this bad guy. Doesn't do a very good job because he's never done this before. Eventually, though, good triumphs over evil, and it's his first step. Now, maybe he goes on to become a Superman-type character. We don't know. But as his first outing, we'll give him a W. It's not pretty. But at the end of the day, they don't ask, how did it happen? Just, did you get the win? Did you get the loss? He got the W, and he's going to start to turn his life in a slightly different direction. I
get what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, and actually the way that you're laying it out makes a lot of sense to me. So it's winning me over in terms of his character, because I guess my take was that scene where he then goes and he's at the breakfast table with his son, and he's kind of revealing to his son, I am who you think I am. I am a superhero. I do have these powers. To me, I was looking for that scene to have Willis's character have a bit more of a glint in his eye, and I felt it still wasn't there. Like, you know what I mean? Right. Almost like, because then it was like, yeah, this guy could be a superhero. Then you're kind of excited, like, where's this gonna go? You know, and then, you know, at the end of the movie, like, what does he like? I expected almost to see, like, yes, I am I am a superhero, like more excited about it. He says that he's finally happy, but he doesn't really show it. So the one thing I did like about this movie, I do want to say.
I'm all ears. Hang on, let me.
Yep.
Okay. Lay it on me.
Okay, you touch base on this, and I just want to reiterate this. Most comic book movies are like these big budget action-packed movies that are, thrill a minute. And the one thing that I did like about this movie is that it's a comic book movie, quote unquote, but it is at a slow, it's a little bit lower key. So to me, it's interesting to see Bruce Willis cast in this role because we've also seen him in those mindless big budget action movies too. Right? So one thing that I did like about it was the fact that it was kind of a lower key approach, but I felt like it was a little bit just too low key, a little bit too slow. Like I understand tamping it down and taking a different approach to the superhero, genre, which is great, which really didn't exist at this time anyway, as you mentioned. But I just felt it was just a little bit too lackluster, for me.
Let me. I think I can answer. I think I can shed some light on this.
Please do.
So, based on my reading, M. Night Shyamalan has in interviews and in writing said that when he conceived of this story, he conceived of basically a 3-act play, and what eventually became the movie Unbreakable was Act 1. Originally, everything you see in Unbreakable was going to be smushed into, if it was a 2-hour movie, would have taken place in about 45 minutes as Act 1. And by the end of Act 1, he accepts that he's got these powers, and we move on to Act 2. And from what he has said was, I couldn't get this whole 3-act thing to work. I had too many things I wanted to explore. I felt, and I know you're going to hate this, he felt that exploring the origin story of these characters was a more interesting story to at least test the waters. Again, you wouldn't do a movie, well, they certainly do movies now, where you come up with an origin story. Like, if I go to see another Superman movie that's an origin story, exactly to your point, I'm not interested. I know how Superman became Superman. Give me something else. He's a character I know and I recognize. But M. Night Shyamalan was like, I'm creating a world from the ground up. I am giving you characters nobody has seen before. I need to spend the time establishing the characters in the world, especially this hero and villain relationship. And he ultimately scrapped Act 2, scrapped Act 3, made Act 1 the whole movie, and said that, maybe someday down the road he would potentially do Act 2 and Act 3 as a part 2 and a part 3 of the story. But he was very satisfied that this one act became a full movie, and here it is. So
what you're saying is that he sort of originally envisioned this as a trilogy, but he just decided to make the one movie. So if that being said, if it comes out that M. Night Shyamalan is going to go back and rename this Unbreakable Episode 4: A New Hope, I'm going to lose
it. So building on that, for people who maybe aren't as familiar with where this has gone, so we have Unbreakable from 2000. And then in 2016, there was another M. Night Shyamalan movie called Split. And it was sorry, I'm just pulling up the entry here. It starred James McAvoy, who, again, was Professor Xavier in the new X-Men movies. But he's done a lot of great movies as well. He was in The Last King of Scotland and a number of other very well-received, critically acclaimed movies. He's a very gifted actor. And this movie, Split, you find out at the very end of Split that it takes place in the same universe as Unbreakable, because there is reference to the events in Unbreakable in the very last scene of Split. Now, you don't need to know that to enjoy the movie. It's just a little wink, wink. If you watch Split and you've seen Unbreakable, you're like, oh, this could be interesting. And so in January, 2 months from now, a third movie is coming out called Glass, and it features David Dunn's character from Unbreakable, Samuel L. Jackson's character from Unbreakable, Mr. Glass, hence the name of the movie being Glass, and McAvoy's character from Split. The three characters all sort of come together. Now, I don't necessarily know if this was his Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 that he had originally conceived, but we are going to get a follow-up to these characters in some sort of new, I don't want to say adventure because I don't think it's going to be billed as an adventure, in some new sort of, I don't even want to call it a superhero movie, but a new film featuring these characters. Let's leave it at that and see where it goes. The trailer, if you're even a marginal fan of Unbreakable and Split, looks great. I personally can't wait to go see it in January. But Split, which was billed as a horror movie, and in none of the media when it came out was it in any way tied to Unbreakable. They're just like, M. Night Shyamalan has back. He's been rejuvenated. He's got some new ideas. He's giving you a horror movie. You haven't had a horror movie from him? Go. And it got very well. It got a lot of critical acclaim. It did very well on video. It made a lot of sales. It did well in the box office. I mean, it wasn't a huge runaway hit, but it got people back into the theaters after movies like The Village and The Lady in the Water and The Happening, which were all pretty bad movies from this guy. He took some time off. He came back. He did Split. People went in. They enjoyed it. And then at the end, they got that little, aha, this is part of his expanded universe. So we'll see where that goes.
I got to say, I'd never heard of Split. You just mentioned it, so I was just looking it up on IMDb. But the one thing that I do say I like about it is I see that Betty Buckley's in it, and she was the mom in 8 is Enough. She was Abby Bradford. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I will like that movie after all. As long as it's got a tie to an old Gen X stuff that I like, it's all good. So one thing before we wrap this up, I noticed one thing at the beginning of this movie. The movie started off and it gave a bunch of stats, and I wanted to talk to you about this for a second. I'm just gonna read out the stats that the movie gives at the very beginning on the screen. Yep. It mentions that there's an average of 35 pages and 124 illustrations in a comic book. And issues range in price from $1 to over $140,000. It mentions that 172,000 comics are sold in the U.S. every day. And the average collector, this is the one that I was interested in, the average collector owns 3,312 comics and will spend approximately 1 year of his entire life reading them. So I wanted to ask you this, Caveman, because you're an avid comic book collector. So the average collector owns 3,312 comics. That's so many. How many comics do you own, Cave?
All right, let's just say, Chris, you and I together will make the average.
So
I would say my collection is around 6,000 issues. So
wow.
You probably have 3 or 4 comics at your house. You add those to my collection. We divide that number in half because there's 2 of us. We're going to hit around 3,000. We're going to come in pretty close to that average.
Oh my God. I wasn't expecting. I was when you answered that way, I thought you meant that me plus you would equal the average collector. So you have about 3,000. No. So you have 6,000. That's incredible.
We're talking
How do you have so many comic books? I'm coming down to your house. I want to hang out.
We're talking physical paper books. Yeah. Now, if we talk digital comics, which obviously were not a thing in 2000.
No. We don't count those. I'm talking comic books.
Yeah. I have terabytes of storage full of digital comics, but actual paper comics, my collection is around 6,000 issues. I've got typically comics are stored at home in what they call a long box. It's a white box, and it holds let's say 300 to 350 issues in a box typically. I have, I think, 35 boxes in the basement.
Holy smokes. And so what would you say is the comic that you have the most issues of?
It would probably be Batman, with with Spider-Man being a very close second. Because if you recall in our last podcast,
you mentioned you like Spider-Man.
Spider-Man was my guy. But when I got back, so I was Spider-Man all my life. I went away to university for a few years, didn't have any money, didn't have anywhere to store the books, stopped buying comics 100% out, just done. When I came back from university and I finally got my own place and I got my own job and I went back to comics as something I had always enjoyed, I started to read Batman comics. And so for the last 20 years, Batman has been my number one choice. And now that I have a job and a little bit of disposable income, I've made a point of going to pull back issues of Batman, which is why my Batman collection is bigger than my Spider-Man collection, because I haven't really made any effort to go back and buy old Spider-Mans, and I stopped reading Spider-Man in 1994, 1993. So, yeah.
My comic book collection is limited to about maybe 50 comics, something like that. The vast majority of which are Richie Rich comics. And then I have a couple of Battlestar Galactica comics, and I have the oversized Star Wars and all that stuff that we talked about before.
Yep.
I don't have a lot. I give them all to my son. My son's 9. He's got them all. He loves Richie Rich. I went upstairs tonight, but when I was saying goodnight to him, and he was laying in bed and he was reading Richie Rich. I'm like, yes, that's so cool.
Nice.
So he just loves that. I don't know if I told this story on an early podcast, one of the first couple podcasts, and I'll just reiterate it now. And I just want to get your reaction reaction to it. So I went down to Fan Expo. You and I talked about this last week. I was at Fan Expo 2016. You were there. We ran into each other. It was all great. I was there with my son, and we went out to the floor, and we were looking for a vendor because my son wanted to buy Richie Rich comics, right? And so we went out there, and of course, let's just put it this way. You go to an event like that where there's people that are like yourself that are just like unbelievably advanced collectors of this stuff. They have thousands of them, and they're all into the superheroes, you know, Spider-Man, Batman. You mentioned Richie Rich, like people look at you like you're like, and it's so funny because it's like, this is like geeks, like ostracizing me as being like an even worse geek, you know, is basically what it is. And like, so everywhere we went, I'm like, hey man, you got Richie Rich comics? He's like, man, what do you think I am, man? You think I'm a geek or something? Like, I'm like, okay, move on to the next. Hey man, you got any Richie Rich comics? He's like, man, I don't think so, man. I'm not a geek. I'm like, geez, actually you are a geek. That's why you're here. But anyway, the thing was, so we went to this big, huge comic book collector guy. He had this unbelievable display. Everything under the sun, like it was just all the superheroes. And my son, I sent him up there, and my son walks up to him and goes, do you have any Richie Rich comics? He's like, Richie Rich. And he looks around, he looks side to side, and he reaches under the table and he pulls out a Richie Rich. He's got one. And he goes, here, take it. And don't tell anyone. But Richie Rich was my favorite when I was a kid too. And I was like, yes. So there's more than one of us out there in the world, even amongst the comic book geeks. But yeah, so overall, the movie, you know, it disappointed me a little bit. Sometimes yeah, go ahead.
It was one more thing I wanted to just touch on before you tell us how much you dislike this movie one more time. One of the things that so I mentioned last week, when I first saw this movie in the theater, I loved it. I thought it was great. And I went and saw it again the next night with a different group of friends. And afterwards, we had a few beverages and a little bite to eat, and we talked about the movie. And you got to think, was a bunch of comic book nerds who had not had a comic book movie since Batman in '89. And so we were very excited about, like, hey, is this potentially a turning point for the film genre? Are we going to start seeing comic book movies? Is this going to be a big hit? Unfortunately, it wasn't a big hit. We didn't really see mainstream comic book movies for quite a while after this. I mean, we started to get things like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, which certainly started to move things in that direction and demonstrate that there was money in these movies if they were made right, if you were true to the source material and you actually took them seriously. But as comic book nerds, we spent a lot of time talking about it and what we like, what we not like. And with my group of friends, a lot of us at the time were working at Blockbuster Video or had worked at Blockbuster Video, or many of us had studied film in college and university. So, you know, it wasn't just hey, wasn't Bruce Willis great in that movie? Yeah, he was great. Wasn't Samuel L. Jackson great in that movie? Yeah, it was great. It was more of almost like a university discussion in a lecture. We started to analyze and pick apart the movie, and some of the points we've already talked about, things like the stylistic shots of the camera to replicate panels in a comic book. But one of the things that I found interesting was the color palette, the choice of color palette throughout this movie, which I'm sure you picked up on.
Oh yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't subtle. Well, it sort of was. So, I mean, all the characters had a color palette that represented them. So Bruce Willis's character was sort of the muted green, the earth tones. He was dressed in greens and beiges, these very sort of subdued colors, almost to represent that he's just a man among the crowd. He although he has these extraordinary powers, he's not taking steps to stand out. As opposed to Samuel L. Jackson's character always was in purple, bright purple, fluorescent purples. When he's a young kid, his mom buys him the comic book is wrapped in purple wrapping paper. When he's born, his mother's wearing a purple dress. We see his mother a couple of times through the course of his life. She's always dressed in purple. He's always dressed in purple. And then towards the end of the movie, when Bruce Willis basically accepts, okay, I have powers and I want to do the right thing, and he goes to I assume it's Grand Central. I'm not sure if that's what it's called in Philly, but the main terminal, and he just sort of stands among the people, and as they brush into him, he starts getting the mental flashes. Did this person do a bad thing? Did this person do a bad thing? And he gets 3 or 4 sort of flashes. He gets one of a lady who's stealing jewelry. He gets one of a guy leaning out the side of a car window and basically, perpetrates a hate crime. He throws stuff at people that are different than him. It says horrible things. You see a guy, a college student, who you assume is going to take sexual advantage of this woman who's passed out, and then eventually you get the main villain that he tackles, this person who has broken into this home, killed some people, kidnapped this family. You probably assume there are other atrocities that weren't seen, and fortunately we don't have to see them, but you kind of put two and two together and figure terrible things have happened. And in each case, these characters in his flashback are wearing very bright colors. The jewel thief is wearing a bright red jacket. The guy who is committing this hate crime is wearing a bright yellow shirt. The college student is wearing almost a fluorescent green, lime green jacket. And then the bad guy, sort of the worst of the worst, is wearing head to toe fluorescent orange jumpsuit. Almost to emphasize, the bad guys are going to be in these bright colors, and the brighter the color, the more they have on them, the worse their crime. And it was this progression. And this is something you see in comic books all the time, where both the heroes and villains have recognized outfits. Superman wears the blue tights, the red cape. Spider-Man has the red and blue outfit. Like, they're very vibrant colors, so that you can immediately identify them among the crowd. It's just as a part of the storytelling. If you had to read through a comic and go, wait, was Superman in that last page? Hold on, I didn't see him anywhere because he was dressed the same as everybody else. In this Unbreakable movie, it's almost like M. Night Shyamalan sort of flipped that, and he's made the villains are always wearing these bright colors. And if you go back, I mean, I know you're not going to go back because you didn't necessarily like it that much, but if the listeners are going to go back and watch it, maybe they haven't watched it recently, keep your eye on the colors. Pay attention to who's wearing what color. Is it a bright color? Is it a muted color? Who's wearing the same colors over and over again? And by the end of the movie, Bruce Willis's son in the last scene is wearing a green shirt, sort of to reflect the green that his father, like, not that I'm sure it's not a deliberate choice by the character, but it was definitely a deliberate choice by the director to sort of represent that the son and the father, they're patching up this relationship, and the son wants to be like his father, and he's wearing this green shirt. And so I just thought the color play, the choice of colors, the way color was used in this movie was done in a very deliberate way, that once you pick up on it, I found for me, it really added another level of enjoyment to the movie.
Okay. Again, the way that I would counteract that was I just took the whole thing as just more of stylistic. It's just more stylistic stuff that doesn't have a lot of substance in the film. That was my take on it. Fair enough. It's two different takes on it. That's all. Anyway, on that note, let's have some fun with Caveman. I think I need to have a beverage, if you don't mind, in order to do this segment with you.
I've been sneaking mine all the way.
Okay, now, that's the best thing.
In a previous podcast, I think one of the very first times I guested on this pod. Now, when I have a beverage, I like to have it in a glass with lots of ice.
You can't drink that when you're recording. What are you doing?
When you drink that when you're recording, you hear the ice clinking around in the glass, and you gave me that feedback. You're like, hey, if you want to have a drink when you're doing this, that's fine, but you got to cut out the ice cubes. So,
or have a beer like me and just open it on the air.
Yeah, I made sure that my beverage was nice and cold and I didn't need ice cubes. So
nice.
While you're opening yours, I'm taking the last sip of mine.
Still Amaretto and Coke? Is that the beverage of choice?
Not tonight. I moved on to something a little different, a little more seasonal, but yeah. Anyone who's going to get me a Secret Santa, Di Serrano, it's my beverage of choice.
Nice. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions related to this film. Okay,
fire away.
Just in general. Now, we one person that we did not talk about in this movie was Robin Wright, and I thought she was fantastic in this movie. She's pretty much good in everything.
I was just about to say, Chris, is there anything she's been in that you didn't like her performance?
Her marriage with Sean Penn.
Yeah, you could call that a performance.
I'll do that. But other than that, she was obviously in this movie, because she played Audrey Dunn, Bruce Willis's character's wife. But my question to you is, in what movie did Robin Wright make her feature film debut in?
I'm fairly certain that's the movie I was watching a mere 2 hours ago, The Princess Bride.
Yes, it is. Congratulations. It was The Princess Bride. A nice, easy one to start you off. We're going to flip things over and talk about Samuel L. Jackson for a second here, because he made one of his first screen appearances as a man holding up people as an armed robber in an Eddie Murphy film. Can you name the movie?
Yeah. Coming to America.
That's correct. Yes, it was. In the McDonald's, or the McDowell's, I should say.
McDowell's.
It was
they have the Big Mac. We have the Big Mick.
The Big Mick. They have 12 beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese on a Sesame seed bun. Our buns have no seeds. Okay. You mentioned you're a huge comic book collector. You said 6,000 comic books? Yeah,
that sounds about right.
Unbelievable. Now, obviously, some of these comic books out there, they can be worth a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Can you name the most valuable comic book in the world?
I have to believe it's Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman.
Very good. Bonus marks if you know how much that a copy sold for at auction in 2014.
I want to say about $1.8 million.
$3.2 million. Wow. Unbelievable.
Chris, ask me how many of those I have in my collection.
How many?
Exactly 0.
How many Richie Rich Billions number 74 do you have, though? I got you there. Okay.
Same amount of Action Comics as I have Richie Rich.
Okay. So one thing we mentioned before about, you said that, this movie wasn't a huge hit. And if you actually take a look at the box office of that year, a couple movies that finished ahead of it were things like, Big Mama's House, The Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, and What Lies Beneath. But What Lies Beneath, do you remember that movie?
I never saw it, but I do know of the movie.
Oh, God, it was awful. It was terrible. I don't know how that movie made more money than anything else. Anyway, so the movie was not a humongous success. It was made for $75 million, and it only made $95 million, so it made a little bit of money. But what I'd like you to do, this is a tough one. These questions get harder as we go. In order, I'd like you to name M. Night Shyamalan's top 3 grossing films. 1, 2, and 3, go.
It's got to be The Sixth Sense, #1.
That's number 1. That's correct.
Are we talking just about the movies he directed or movies he has a credit on?
No, movies he directed.
Okay, so Stuart Little is out because he didn't direct it. He just had screenwriting credit. Okay, so you want the next 2. Was Unbreakable? No, maybe Split. Let's go with Split.
No, I'm sorry. The next one is Signs. And then The Village, surprisingly enough.
Really?
Yeah, The Village made lots of money. Even crappy movies make a lot of money. Speaking of crappy movies, Bruce Willis has never been nominated for an Oscar, but he has, however, been nominated for several Razzies for the worst performance. Can you name any of the 6 films for which he's been nominated for a Razzie? Just you name one of them. Just name one. Six movies he's been nominated for a Razzie for. Worst performance. Just name one.
The whole 9 yards.
No, I'm sorry. That's not
correct.
The
whole 10 yards.
No, not right. Hudson Hawk from 91. Remember that? God, that was bad.
It's on TV tonight. It is on TV tonight. Hudson Hawk, I saw it in the lineup.
In 1994, he was nominated for both North and Color of Night. And in 1998, he was nominated for 3 films, The Siege, Mercury Rising, and of course, Armageddon.
Oh, not Armageddon. He was great.
Now, for your final question, earlier, I mentioned rather controversially Adrian Brody's performance in The Village because he went full as a reference to Robert Downey Jr. seen in Tropic Thunder only. So, Caveman, in Tropic Thunder, what other actor did Robert Downey Jr. refer to as having gone full?
Sean Penn.
Yes, he did. Bonus if you can name the movie that he was in.
Sam I Am.
Yeah, I Am Sam.
I Am Sam.
Very good. Remember,
so close.
Remember that he went home empty-handed. Remember?
Yep.
God, his performance was good. God, I'm not a huge, I'm not a big Robert Downey Jr. fan overall, but man, in that movie Tropic Thunder,
he was good. He was
unbelievable. Really good. Man, oh man, was he good in that movie. Anyway, so that there it is. So congratulations, you got most of them. You got most of them. You did a few, missed a few, but that's okay. I got to stump you from time to time. As we mentioned, next week, Yancey is going to join us on the show, so that's going to be fantastic. We're so glad to have Yancey back. We like that. Round of applause there for Yancey. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to us on Twitter, @Amaron_DM, you'll find Derek there. @Yancey Eaton, like I said, Yancey will be back next week. And @CMcBrien is me. PopGoesYourWorld.com is the website. And make sure to leave us a review on iTunes if you don't mind. Until next week, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter @CMcBrien or @Yancey Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes, or wherever you download and listen to the show.